what's wrong with America today? Depression among young people, it's up 60% in a single decade. Less than half of Americans say they're satisfied with their lives. And nearly 70% believe the American dream is dead. And yet, by every objective measure, we're living in the most prosperous era in human history. So, what's going on? Well, hi all, I'm Lenny Esposito, and on this Come Let Us Reason Together, I want to take a deep dive into the question of why, if we're wealthier than almost any generation in history, are we more anxious, more dissatisfied, and less grounded than ever? And could it be that the greatest threat to faith isn't suffering but success? In fact, 3,500 years ago, Moses stood before a nation on the edge of its greatest windfall. They were going to inherit cities that they didn't have to build, houses full of amazing things, and gardens and food supplies that they didn't have to work for. And he gave them a warning that reads kind of like what we're seeing today. When you eat and are satisfied, he says, be careful not to forget the Lord. So today we're opening up Deuteronomy chapter 6, and we will find out why abundance may be a more dangerous test than suffering ever was, and what God says we can do about it. That's all coming up on this. Come let us reason together. And we're going to be in Deuteronomy 6 as we've begun this journey in Deuteronomy and start to plow these fields in this old dusty book that a lot of people don't necessarily pay significant attention to. We're finding new ways to understand it and see its relevance. And I think today's message will be particularly relevant. I wanted to start off by asking you a question. What's wrong with America today? So, well, I can go on social media and get a lot of responses to that question, can't I? But I think that as you talk with folks, the sense of positivity that in prior generations had always been held by Americans and those different cohorts that you would ask has kind of waned recently. And it's understandable if you just talk to folks, especially young people. Usually it's those who are under 30 or so are normally the most optimistic about the future, the most positive. Yeah, they want to make changes, but usually they're the most gung-ho about improving the world, improving their nation. That's not the case anymore. In fact, new data from the Center for Disease Control's National Center for Health Statistics indicates that the prevalence of depression in U.S. adults and adolescents has increased by 60% over the last decade. Nearly 40% of people aged 12 or older with depression have received counseling or therapy from a health professional within the previous 12 months. 87.9% of adolescents and adults report difficulty with work, home, or social activities due to their depression symptoms. And 31.2% report extreme difficulty in performing those activities. More than 1 in 10 U.S. adults, according to a national health survey, has taken prescription medication for depression in the last year. Women at 15.3% are more than twice as likely to take medication for depression than men. And it goes on and on. Beyond this, the Gallup organization, when they were asking Americans, found that less than half of Americans say they are very satisfied. 44% say they are very satisfied with the way things are going in their personal life. That's the lowest point by 2 percentage points in their entire history of taking this poll. It also marks the continuation of a decline that we've seen since January 2020, as you can see from the graph.
Harvard does a research poll for youth and asked them how they are doing, and 43% of youth ages 18 to 29 say they are struggling or, quote, getting by with limited financial security, which the poll frames as a defining feature of young adults' daily lives. So financial security is a thing. A separate Wall Street Journal NRC poll published in 2025 found that only 25% of Americans believe they have a good chance to improve their standard of living. And that's the lowest reading since the surveys began in 1987. Nearly 70% of Americans, nearly 70% said the American dream of hard work leading to success no longer holds. And it never did. The Pew Research Corporation also found that as far back as 2010, a growing number of adults believe the next generation would not enjoy a better standard of living than they do now, showing that this pessimism has been building for some 15 years. Wow. Scary. Are we really crashing and burning? Is that what's going on today? Well, actually, no. When we look at the facts objectively, we're living in a time of unprecedented wealth, prosperity, and abundance. Johann Norberg, who wrote a book a couple of years ago, Progress, talks about his ancestors in the 1850s, not in some third world nation, but in Sweden, first world country, who went through extreme famines where they couldn't get but crumbs of bread, where families were knocking on their doors asking for any handout. And while they, because the children prompted the parents to give them what little they had, found those beggars dead between their home and the neighbor's home the next morning. But in his book, Progress, he says, when you compare the people of today to any other generation in history, we actually have it better than ever. He writes, we are witnessing the greatest improvement in global living standards ever to take place. Poverty, malnutrition, illiteracy, child labor, and infant mortality are falling faster than at any other time in human history. Life expectancy at birth has increased more than twice as much in the last century as it did in the previous 200,000 years. The risk that any individual would be exposed to war, die in a natural disaster, or be subjected to a dictatorship has become smaller than in any other epoch. A child born today is more likely to reach retirement age than his forebears were to live to their 5th birthday. So why the difference? What's going on? What splits us up? There is a thing in psychology that you may have heard of called sudden wealth syndrome. You may notice this sometimes when you see lottery winners who, within 5 to 7 years after striking it rich and pulling on the big time, find themselves declaring bankruptcy. Or Major League sports stars after a lucrative contract who are maybe injured, blown out a knee or something like that. When they've stopped getting the income, a lot of times they fall into economic turmoil pretty quickly. And part of the reason that's true is because with a sudden rapid influx of wealth comes a whole host of issues. See, many people assume luxuries have no additional demands. As long as I've got the money to spend, I'll spend it. That's not true. And of course, people who come into sudden wealth after living a life in the lower economic strata usually have an unbalanced view of money. They seem to think that wealth is unending, or that, there's plenty more where that came from. Also, they tend to start becoming a little bit distrustful as other people hit them up, right? You hit it big, and all of a sudden the friends and family members that you never knew are knocking on your door, calling you up and telling them about the surgeries they need or how their kids want to get into this college or what have you. And you can feel not merely put upon, but isolated, that nobody understands who you are. That's why in sudden wealth syndrome, a person can suddenly feel anxious, guilty, or insecure about money. Yet from a generational viewpoint, many of these problems are showing up in young people today. Could it be that we have gotten so wealthy so quickly in historic terms that what we as a collective culture are doing is suffering from sudden wealth syndrome? That we're assuming our life should be riches all the time when that's not the case. In our passage today, what we're going to find is Moses, talking to the Israelite children, warns them of this very danger. Last time we talked about the Shema, the verses, how the Lord is one God, and we should love the Lord our God with all our heart, our soul, and our might. These verses follow naturally from that and make some specific cautions and give some specific advice on why that's important and what we should do. So starting in verse 10, let's read. Moses speaking, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he would give you, a land with large and beautiful cities that you did not build, houses full of every good thing that you did not fill them with, cisterns that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. And when you eat and are satisfied, be careful not to forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Fear the Lord your God, worship him, and take your oaths in his name. Do not follow other gods, the gods of the peoples around you, for the Lord your God, who is among you, is a jealous God. Otherwise, the Lord your God will become angry with you and obliterate you from the face of the earth. Do not test the Lord your God as you tested him at Massah. Carefully observe the commands the Lord your God, the decrees, the statutes he has commanded to you. Do what is right and good in the Lord's sight, so that you may prosper, so that you may enter and possess the good land the Lord your God swore to give your fathers, by driving out all of your enemies before you, as the Lord had said. And when your son asks you in the future, what is the meaning of these decrees, statutes, and ordinances that the Lord our God has commanded you? Tell him, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand. Before our eyes, the Lord inflicted great and devastating signs and wonders on Egypt, on Pharaoh, and all his household. But he brought us there in order to lead us in and give us the land he swore to our fathers. The Lord commanded us to follow all these statutes and to fear the Lord our God for our prosperity always and for our preservation, as it is today. Righteousness will be ours if we are careful to follow every one of these commands before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us." Let's pray. Father, you have given us so much, and we see it. We kind of understand it. I don't know if we understand it fully. But help us then, Lord, to see it more clearly, to know how beholden we are to you for the gifts that you've given, and how we can obediently follow your commands in order that we can enjoy the goodness that you've provided for us. In Jesus' name, amen. So let's talk about this a little bit. Let's explore a little bit more of what I call the perils of prosperity. It's interesting when we were looking at the history of the Jewish people in wandering in the wilderness. They start off as slaves, right? They're indentured servants. They're subjected to the whip of the taskmaster in Egypt. They've got nothing. They don't even have freedom to control themselves. And then they're wandering in the wilderness, which is, I guess, better than slavery, but oi, it's so hot. What are we going to do now? And there's all this sand everywhere. I don't like going to the beach much. My wife loves going to the beach. I'm not a beach person. There may be several reasons for that. One is, of course, I've, as a child, had one too many sunburns. Every time I went to the beach, I got sunburned. So maybe there's an association there. And sand is a thing. It gets everywhere. People ask me, well, why don't you like the beach? I said, it's because the sand always gets in the keyboard, and that's a problem. But no, but that's a joke. But now I like going to the beach because I can, it's a 60-mile ride, and you've got the bike path that'll take you all the way down there. But being at the beach, that's a different story. But now, because I can associate going to the beach on my bike with being at the beach, I like it better. So it's a kind of a happy compromise. She loves the beach. She'd spend all the time there. Israel, wandering in the wilderness, started to complain. And in fact, when you see where it is in verse 17, where it says, carefully observe the commands the Lord your God decrees he has given you, do what is right. And then he says, do not test the Lord your God as you tested him at Massah, right? Verse 16. What was that? Well, this is a point story in Exodus chapter 17. And if you want to flip over there, you can do so. I'll just read it for you. Exodus 17, starting in verse 1, it says, the entire Israelite community left the wilderness of Sin, moving from one place to the next according to the Lord's command. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So the people complained to Moses, because that's what they do. That's what these folks do. Give us water to drink. Why are you complaining to me? Moses replied to them. Why are you testing the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water and grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you ever bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, what should I do with these people? In a little while they will stone me. The Lord answered Moses, go ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take the staff you struck the Nile with in your hand and go. I am going to stand there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. When you hit the rock, the water will come out of it and the people will drink. Now Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. He named the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites complained and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? That last sentence is really important, and if you have a paper Bible, underline it. If you don't have a paper Bible, it's going to be tough. But Massah, by the way, that word means testing, and Meribah means contention. The people were feeling contentious, feeling tested. But actually what was going on here was God was testing the people. He wanted to see what they would do. Do they trust me? Even in times of want, in times of indigence, in times of lack, do they trust me? But it seems that they didn't. In fact, they did something actually worse. They challenged God. Daniel I. Block, who's one of our commentators of the point at Massah, writes this: under normal circumstances, it would be inappropriate for inferiors to challenge their superiors, which the Israelites actually did 10 times, Numbers 14:22 makes that point, on their journey to the promised land. Ironically, at Massah, and in every circumstance of deprivation, Yahweh was in fact testing the spiritual mettle of the Israelites. However, they twisted his testing of their faith in him into their own test of Yahweh, demanding that he prove his presence by indulging them with their physical desires and making his response the condition for following him. I'll only follow God if he meets my needs. You'll only be my boss if you meet my needs. Well, that's kind of not the way how the employer-employee relationship works. I mean, yes, you should be employed by someone and he should be paying you a wage for the services that you provide. That's true. There's a contract, there's an agreement. And if that situation becomes intolerable, well, then you dissolve the relationship. But you don't get to say, okay, you've hired me, but really 8 o'clock doesn't work real well for me. I'm going to start strolling in at 8:45. And I know that my job requirements are this and this and this, but I really don't like to do that last one, so I'm not going to do it. That's not an employer-employee relationship anymore. You're trying to dictate all the terms. You're trying to you still want the money, you don't want any of the responsibility. In this instance, who's giving the orders here? Is Israelites giving the orders to God? Or is God the one providing for the Israelites? This verse becomes really, really important when we think about Jesus, especially in the temptation in the wilderness. Because Deuteronomy 6:16 is what Jesus quotes to Satan. You remember the passage. Jesus had been fasting in the wilderness for 40 days, right? He was hungry. Satan says, well, take these stones and make them bread. Jesus says, well, man will not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Then he takes him to the top of the temple, to the pinnacle, and says in Matthew 4:7, throw yourself off. And he quotes Psalm 91. The devil's smart. He quotes the word of God back to Jesus. Throw yourself off, for God said that he will keep his angels charge over you and not let even your foot fall to God's anointed. But Jesus looks at him and says, oh no, you're not getting me on that one. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test. This is the test. God, you really have to deliver for me today. I mean, if you really want me to be your follower, you better deliver for me today. That's a temptation. That was the problem of the prior generation. Of course, we know how that prior generation ended up, right? They all perished in the wilderness. 10 times tested, 10 times failed. By the way, again, Jesus, being the second Israel, he succeeds at that test where Israel failed. But now we have a different kind of test. Instead of indigence, we have abundance. And the next generation of Israel is going to be going into a land where basically they've won the lottery. Right? It's very clear here. You know, you're going to go into a land, large and beautiful cities. It's not sand. I mean, there's rocks and stuff in Israel, but there's beautiful. If you've gone to Joppa or any of those places, the seacoast is beautiful. There's a lot of abundant harvests, right? The fertile valley in Israel is pretty much the breadbasket for half of Europe. There were beautiful cities. There were houses full of good things that they were going to be able to take over. Don't have to build your own houses. There was vineyards that they didn't have to plant. There were cisterns that they didn't have to do. That's a big deal. When you have to drill through rock and all you have is like a hand drill, it's a lot of work. You know, it's not like today where you can just hire a crew. Matter of fact, in the ancient cultures, if you found a change of clothes, most people only had one. It was just so time consuming to create new garments. So these guys are getting all of it. It is truly a bounty. It is truly winning the lottery. But moving from deprivation to decadence can probably be more dangerous than testing God in your absence of needs. Because, number one, abundance naturally leads to self-centeredness. When you have a lot, you start to believe that a lot is what you deserve. And the more you have, the more you think you deserve it. Daniel I. Block again writes, Yahweh would deliver into their hands the fruits of Canaanite labor, ready for their enjoyment. But this instant prosperity, it would test their devotion to Yahweh in a different way. The divine benefactor he is, having eaten and been satisfied, prosperity would yield smugness, which would yield a lapse of memory, especially concerning the source of the gifts. Oh, isn't that true? Isn't it easy for us to forget the good things because it's the way we've always had? Air conditioning. Air conditioning is a lifesaver. People don't realize how much heat can cause all kinds of difficult. By the way, when we talk about climate change and things like that, a lot of people like to talk about the heat levels and the dangers of heat stroke, which are absolutely true. But do you realize that 10 times more people die from cold weather than from hot weather? People freeze to death much more frequently. It's a much more dangerous scenario than hot weather. But if you're hooked on global warming, that doesn't sell, so we don't mention it. But the idea of indoor heating and indoor air conditioning, I mean, most people in the United States today have air conditioning regardless of whether they're living under the current poverty line or not. When we have abundance, we focus on those material comforts. Dad, you guys really got to do something about this internet. It's running too slow. Well, you could go to the library, see how their internet's really fast. Oh, I don't want to go all the way over there. It would take me almost 5 minutes to drive to the library. It would interrupt my whole day, 5 whole minutes. And how long would it have taken you to walk? Which is what most people did for most of their lives. You see the material comforts. And more directly, why do people bother calling on God if we have all this stuff and there's really no need, right? I don't have any problems. I don't need to call on God. I'm doing fine. And don't we talk with a lot of folks in our world today? Well, you have your God, that's nice, but I'm doing okay by myself. Haven't we heard that over and over again? Isn't that, first of all, fundamentally selfish? If God is the giver of all good gifts, if every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no changing nor shadow of turning, then to say, well, I don't need to call on him, I don't need to talk to him, I don't need to be with him. Well, that's just selfishness. That's the, hey, Dad, can I have your ATM card and maybe I'll see you next week. I once had a millennial tell me that the job of a parent is to help his or her child so that they're always out of trouble, and if they need financial assistance, you should just provide it. My response is, if you want to spoil a child, give them what they want. That's the recipe for spoiling a child. With no strings attached, what happens is you become self-centered, you become smug, and you forget the source of the gifts and that the fact that those actually do cost somebody something. What did our gift of salvation cost us? Nothing. It's free, right? Salvation is a free gift of God. What did it cost God? Absolutely everything. Do we forget that? Sometimes in my devotions I will pray, one of the points in my daily devotion is to reflect on the cross and the sacrifice that Jesus made on us for our behalf. And I will pray that, but I also sometimes pray, and I remember the sacrifice, Father, that you made in giving your Son. Because as a father, I know what that would feel like if I had to give up my son for someone else. So it's not simply Jesus that made the sacrifice. God makes the sacrifice too. My concern as this passage relates to today is simply that America has never been as affluent as it is right now, like I said. And let's just take current stats. You don't even have to go back 200 years or so. University of Chicago, Notre Dame, and Baylor University got together, did some research, and they found that poverty has fallen 27 percentage points since 1980. That's over a quarter. That's an amazing stat. When asked about this, why then is everybody feeling so pressed upon? Yes, there are different values, there are different things that are costing more than in the past. But in an NPR episode, Darian Woods, who was interviewing a neuroscientist, Tali Sharot, says that the median income right now for 25-year-olds is somewhere between $42,000 and $50,000 a year in 2026. Millennials, Gen Xers, and baby boomers all earned significantly less when they were 25 than 25-year-olds today, even when you adjust for inflation. Young people's wealth is also higher, and yet a significant portion of young people today feel like they don't have enough. Now, there's student debt, there's high house prices, inequality maybe. Yeah, but they don't fully explain this mismatch, he says. So he asks Tali Sharot, again, she's a neuroscientist at MIT and the University of College London, and she explains it this way. Part of this depression, part of this feeling of malaise, this feeling that we're not getting better, is because in order to be happy and satisfied, we need to feel ourselves progressing. We need to feel ourselves getting better in our own situations. A sense of progression is important. So she continues. She says, so it might be that you have great things in your life, right? Like an interesting job, comfortable home, reliable car. But those bring you less joy on a day-to-day basis because they've been there all the time. This is called habituation, which is a fundamental concept in psychology where you adjust your expectations basically to the surroundings with which you're comfortable. And that's, again, what we see. This is part of our problem. We start to believe that we deserve it all. We start to think that this is where we should be. We should be able to have our daily lattes. We should be able to have our fast internet connections and our smartphones. But this is the warning that Moses is giving Israel, that when you get into that area of blessing, of abundance beyond what you would have normally expected, be careful because you can forget God. He echoes this in Deuteronomy chapter 8, in verses 10 through 14, when he says, quote, when you eat and are full, you will bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. That's a command. That's not a prediction. He says, be careful that you don't forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commands, ordinances, and statutes that I'm giving you today. When you eat and are full, and build beautiful houses to live in, and your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold multiply, and everything else you have increases, be careful that your heart doesn't become proud, and you forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. We get proud. We forget what was before. We forget sometimes even our humble beginnings. And we forget then God. Now, part of the problem in this habituation, in this measurement of ourselves, is that we're using false rulers, false yardsticks to do so. We are using what we call a relative measure of success. We all seek to be what I call Pinterest perfect. And this is especially true in a generation that's grown up with tablets, with screens. We seek to be Pinterest perfect. We measure ourselves against what all of our friends or influencers post online and think that's who we should be. That's where we should be. That's what the good life looks like, and I don't have it. And of course, most of us if we thought about it for more than half a second, understand that that's all fake anyway. That if you've ever watched how they make those different shorts or reels or videos, you'll find that, matter of fact, even there's a couple of really interesting videos where they show you how they make the girl with this perfect figure, and they show what they're taping back and what they're, struggling to get into Spanx or whatever the case may be. All the things actually the big thing now is waist binding. I can't believe the corsets have come back again. I'm like, oh my goodness, here we are, 1910 all over again. But it's all phony. It's all pretend. And what do we see? Well, we see the income paradox survey. Harris poll came out, said 64% of those people who earn $200,000 or more, report that six-figure income is, quote, a survival mode, not a sign of wealth. 64%. 2/3 of people who make $200,000 or more say that I'm just surviving on that. That's all I can do. 48% of people who make $200,000 or more admitted to pretending their payment app, their Venmo or their Zelle, was malfunctioning so they didn't have to contribute to whatever the check was that they and their friends were trying to pay. And for those who earn $200,000 or more, 53% said, quote, I wouldn't feel financially secure unless I earned double what I make right now. You see the problem? You see the problem with relative wealth? It's easy to get used to the status quo. Sudden wealth syndrome often produces stress, not because money is absent, but because the expectations, identity, and social comparisons get scrambled after these sudden changes in status. This is why especially younger Americans can live in a materially better era than their grandparents and still feel that life is worse. Their reference point is not the past, it's their peers. Headlines, housing prices, the visibility of inequality, it's just the things that we assume and don't want to see ourselves as losing out on. Keeping up with the Joneses has been digitized. And it has consequences, not simply for the individuals, but for the society as a whole. Now, there's a growing movement within today's generations, younger generations, that shuns both God and family as essential to their well-being. They like independence. They think that marriage, kids, responsibilities, those are all hard. And they're limiting. I need to be the real me. I need to express who I am. Rachel Cohen, whose article in Vox was entitled How Millennials Learned to Dread Motherhood, wrote this quote, Today, the question of whether to have kids generates anxiety far more intense than your garden variety ambivalence. For too many, it inspires dread. I know some women who have decided to forego motherhood altogether, not out of an empowered certainty that they want to remain child-free, but because the alternative seems impossibly daunting. Really? Isn't motherhood the single most natural thing in the world? Haven't all humans been doing it since the beginning of time? But it's daunting. Others are still choosing motherhood, but with a profound apprehension that it will require them to sacrifice everything that brings them pleasure. Do you see the backwardsness of this? Do you see the fact that bringing a human being who loves you into the world would be considered sacrifice all pleasure? That's backwards. In fact, the single biggest reason childless adults give as to why they won't have kids is simply, quote, they just don't want to. Now, Solomon warned against this thought process In Ecclesiastes 4, starting in verse 8, he writes, "There's a person without a companion, without even a son or brother, and though there is no end to all his struggles, his eyes are still not content with riches. Who am I struggling for," he asks, "and depriving myself of good things?" Solomon says, "This too is futile and a miserable task. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up. But pity the one who falls without the other to lift him up. Also, if two lie down together, can they keep warm? But how can one person alone keep warm? And if someone overpowers one person, two can resist him. And a cord of three strands is not easily broken." Now, of course, that's symbolic. This is one of the things that family does. In fact, the Los Angeles Times, just last Sunday, ran an op-ed piece talking about the 36 million Americans who are of elderly age but are alone. And they said, it's a crisis point now. We really need to start having these people have someone to whom they can be accountable to. Let each other know that they're there. As a matter of fact, they even have an app now. They have an app where single, live-at-home, elderly folks have to at least once a week check in. The app reminds you, hey, signal and let us know you're okay. And then if it does that, then that's fine. If it tries a couple of times and you don't post that you're doing well, it actually contacts whoever the emergency contacts are on your list so that they can go and check on you in case you've slipped or fallen or passed out or what have you. Now, that's interesting, but it's also disturbing to me. Why are we outsourcing care to an app? Just the fact that that app exists seems to me to say, I really don't want to be bothered on having to call my mother or my grandmother or my aunt myself. I don't want to have to deal with all of that. What I really need to do is have something automate it for me. Then I can go ahead and live my life again. Is this what human relationship has become? And then we see folks turn around and start chat conversations with AI because they have no real friends, which is scary. This is a problem. We want friends on our terms, or we want friends to be perfect if they only agree with us. Family members should, of course, march lockstep into whatever political or social values we hold. But that's not how human relationships work. That's never how human relationships worked. And is it any wonder that we get more and more isolated from one another? Social media, by its very nature, is not social. It's isolating. It's something you have to do outside of the touch of another actual human being. It's simulation of relationship. And when we get affluent, of course, spiritual values takes even a back seat to all other values. We start to fear of losing what even we have, and we start to, again, relativize these economic struggles and put the emphasis on money as opposed to the emphasis on relationship. But what did Jesus tell us? Man cannot serve two masters, right? You can't serve both God and mammon. You have to choose one or the other. But if you choose God, maybe the blessings get thrown in as a side benefit. In fact, when Jesus was teaching, a person came up to him with a complaint. Family issues complaint. There was a squabble. If you've ever had a death in the family, you'll know that anytime there's a will and multiple individuals, especially when if say the father dies and there's still the mother, it's usually okay. But if both patriarchs die, then the siblings show up. There's always some kind of tension usually. And inheritance does weird things to people. This gentleman in Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 13, says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." That's the complaint. Hey, I'm not getting my fair share. Oh, that phrase. I'm not getting my fair share. Dude, you've got Jesus in front of you, and this is the thing you're bringing up? You are spiritually blind. If I had Jesus in front of me, that's not the question I'm asking. You know, first of all, I'm probably not asking any question. Just shut up and tell me what you want me to know, right? But Jesus looks at him and says, "Friend, who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you?" That's not my role. My role isn't to dole out, is to be the executor of a will. What you're asking me to do is silly. You're missing the point. He then told them, "Watch out and be on guard against all greed, because one's life is not the abundance of his possessions." Your target is wrong. You're looking to possessions, you're not looking to your spiritual life. And then he told them a parable. A rich man's land was very productive. And he thought to himself, "What should I do since I don't have anywhere to store my crops? I will do this. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones and store all my grain and my goods there. Then I'll say to myself, you've many goods stored up for many years. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourself. That's what I'll do." Sound fiscal planning. Saving it up for a rainy day. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that his life wasn't going to last forever. Maybe not even as long as his storage in his grain silos. God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life is demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, well, whose would those be?" That's how it is with one who stores up treasures for himself and is not rich toward God. He then said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about the body, what you will wear, for life is more than food, and the body more than clothing." It's easy living in an era of abundance to forget to put the first things first, to test God, to say, where is my share? Where is my fair share? Proverbs 11:28 tells us anyone trusting in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage. So how do we test God? What do we do in our lives? In times of need, do we demand from him those things that we want to see? Are we approaching God? And again, all of this usually comes about because we have a misunderstanding of who God is. I think a lot of folks, when they pray, if they're going to be honest, they shouldn't say, "Our Father who art in heaven." Maybe they should say, "My genie who art in heaven." The whole name it and claim it movement, right? The word faith, speak it into existence. This is their fundamental concept of how God works, is that you have certain recipes or prayers or faith actions that you will do, and God will certainly provide because of that. Notice that in Massa, when the Israelites were tested with that water, it wasn't that they just started asking for water with no prompting. They were thirsty. Their animals were thirsty. They're looking around a desert and they're saying, "It is dry here." And the threat of danger, the idea that there may be, significant thirst and difficulty, that's a big deal. That was a problem. That was something that was a real issue that they were facing. What they didn't do was to say, does it make sense that God would pull us out of Egypt, would do the mighty works that he did, would do all of those miracles and all of the curses that he fell upon Egypt, and promise us the promised land? He promised it back to Abraham 400 years ago, and here he is does it make sense that after 400 years, he's starting to deliver it only to let us die in the desert? Is that logical? We have to use our reasoning, our rationality, as much as our feelings and our physical desires when understanding who God is. In fact, as rational beings, we should be using that primarily. What is your character, God? Now, it would be one thing to pray to God and say, God, this is one of my big prayers. I have no idea how you're going to get me out of this. None. Things are looking pretty black. The only light I see, that's that train coming the other direction. But I know what you've done for me before. I've seen it. I've seen how you've met me right as I'm ready to step off that cliff. Remember the Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom scene, right? The exercise of faith. You got to take that step, and you're met. Now, that's Spielberg's creativity, sure. But there is something to that when we read about the biblical accounts. Sometimes it becomes pretty tough. Sometimes we get to desperation points. But God meets us. My genie who aren't in heaven. That's what the Israelites wanted. The other problem was Canaan, ignoring him in times of plenty. And we see this as well. Matter of fact, it's prevalent among especially Gen Xers. This book by Christian Smith, Soul Searching, which I highly recommend, phenomenal book. It's a little bit academic, but he went and researched Christian kids, 12 to 20 or so, across the country, did in-depth interviews, and what he found is that primarily children today are not atheistic. They actually do believe in God. But the kind of God they believe in, it's a faith in what he labeled as moral therapeutic deism. Now, what does that mean? Let me unpack it. First of all, you should do good stuff. You should be moral. God expects me to live a pretty good life. Now, that morality is usually measured by one's own understanding of right and wrong. And by the way, this is a spectrum. Not all kids fall into this. Of course, he found that Orthodox beliefs tend to fall more in line with those who go to church, say, on a weekly basis. So kids who are attending services regularly, who have families who pray together regularly, things like that. But he found that they do believe that you should be moral. You should act kindly towards other people, shouldn't say bad things, etc., etc. They believe God is out there somewhere, but, I live my day-to-day life. He does his thing, whatever his thing's doing, and it's kind of like the CEO of a company. I just do my job, and whatever they do over there, and I never have to worry about it. Deism, this detachment that God is not personally involved in their everyday lives unless they're in trouble. And that's the therapeutic part. If I'm in trouble, then I should be able to call on God and he should be able to answer me. That's moral therapeutic deism. That's Deuteronomy 6, almost in a nutshell. Leave me alone, let me explore and find my way, and then if I get into a jam, you can be my lifeguard and pull me out. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to go back in and swim the riptide the second time, because you're going to be there to pull me out again, right? This is the problem that the Israelites were facing. What does God say? Verse 18, do what is right and good in the Lord's sight so that you may prosper, so that you may enter and possess the good land the Lord swore to your fathers by driving out all your enemies. It is the obedience that makes the difference. Now, the results of this material wealth and spiritual poverty, I believe, starts with our misunderstanding of our relationship with God, as I said. First of all, you'll notice that in verse 13, fear the Lord your God, worship him, and take your oaths in his name. You take oaths in God's name when you believe that God will actually do something if you violate the oath. When you take an oath and you swear on something, you're actually saying, that's my collateral. If I violate this oath, then whatever that collateral piece comes into play. So if you're swearing before God, you're saying, may God do something to me if I break my oath. You're assuming that God is real. Do not follow other gods, the gods of the peoples around you, for the Lord your God who is among you is a jealous God. Let's talk about that word jealous for a minute, because jealousy can be a term today that's misleading. And in fact, Darrell Block, in his commentary, noted this, and he doesn't like the word jealous. He would rather translate this verse, for the Lord your God is an impassioned God. He's passionate for you. Do we understand God as being passionate for us? Block writes, the usual interpretation of the word quana as jealousy is misleading because most view jealousy as an illegitimate disposition, akin to envy or covetousness or exaggerated and illegitimate possessiveness over what somebody already owns. But in the First Testament, quana often speaks of a legitimate passion that is aroused when interference from a third party threatens a proper relationship, particularly a marriage relationship when another lover enters the picture. Not all jealousy is the same, right? Ladies, let me ask you a question. If you were at a club and some boorish guy comes, starts hitting on you over and over again, and your husband laughs it off, or your boyfriend just looks away, would that bother you? Would it bother you this guy's pressing on your significant other and your husband's not doing a thing? Heck yeah. You expect some kind of reaction. That's the kind of jealousy we're talking about. That's the kind of impassioned claim that God wants to hold us to. God loves Israel. They are considered to be betrothed to Jehovah. And it's at this verse that you start getting the analogy that is found across the Old Testament of Israel being the unfaithful wife, playing the harlot with all the foreign gods. That is the consistent picture that God uses throughout the Old Testament, starting here when you go to worship other gods. The church, similarly, is the bride of Christ. And as such, we are to be fully devoted to him. And we expect him to be impassioned toward us, so that neither death, nor life, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor any other created thing would separate us from the Lord our God. But not only is he an impassioned husband, he's a meticulous master. He takes care about these things. He plans things out. Remember Romans 8:28. Right? We know all things work together for the good to those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. We claim that. Usually in these times of difficulty, when we're tested, that's one of the things that we remind ourselves of. All things will work together for the good. God must have planned it out. What goes even deeper than that? Because before Romans 8:28 is Romans 8:26. Isn't that amazing? Romans 8:26 says, the Spirit also helps us in our weakness because we do not know what to pray for as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with inexpressible groanings. So even in our times of crises, when we are praying about that issue, the Spirit is interceding for us. Let me correct. They don't have the whole picture. Let me correct that for you. And the Spirit actually interprets our prayers to be more effective and better. And this is why we see that God will meet us. In fact, Job, if you look at Job, after Satan in chapter 1 challenged God to say Job was going to curse you. Job is going to abandon you. And he takes away his wealth. He takes away his children. He takes away all these things. And it says that Job tore his clothes, put ash on his head, but then fell down and worshipped. Worshipped after the disaster. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Wow, that's faith. So we misunderstand our relationship with God. And the results of continued misunderstanding, well, it's the danger of judgment. As verse 15 says, for the Lord your God who is among you is a jealous God. Otherwise the Lord your God will become angry with you and obliterate you from the face of the earth. Salt that has lost its flavor, what's it good for but to be trampled on, right? Basically, as Darrell Block says, in short, if Yahweh's people behave like the Canaanites, then they should expect the fate of the Canaanites. And we'll explore more of that down the road. Okay, lastly, how we can guard against this poisonous prosperity. Well, it's all in verses 18 through 25. First of all, you have to remember that what you're reading here is what I call the gospel to the Jewish people, the gospel to the Israelites. What is the meaning of the decrees, statutes, and ordinances the Lord your God has commanded you? And in verse 21 they say, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand. Before our eyes the Lord inflicted great and devastating signs and wonders on Egypt, on Pharaoh, and on all his household. But he brought us from there in order to lead us and give us the land he swore to our fathers. The Lord commands us to follow all these statutes and to fear the Lord our God for our prosperity always and our preservation as it is today. So notice the story. Number one, the people were enslaved, needing salvation. Through no power of their own, God rescued them from slavery and death, showing mighty works and triumphing over the enemy. Then God proved his might by showing incredible signs in both Egypt and in the desert as they were traveling. Water from a rock, as an example. God brings Israel into the land of promise where they have the opportunity to enjoy his continued blessings forever. What is our story, Christian? Can we tell it the way they told it? You were enslaved to sin, Romans 6:17 tells us. You needed salvation, even though you're an enemy of God. And through no power of your own, Ephesians 2:8 and 9, Christ rescued you from slavery and death, showing mighty works and triumphing over the enemy, as Colossians 2:15 and 1 Corinthians 15:55 tell us. God proved his might by showing incredible signs both in the rising from the dead, Jesus rising from the dead. Remember John chapter 2, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it again. And in our lives since, as Ephesians 1:3 tells us. And God brings us into the land of promise where we have the opportunity to enjoy his continued blessings forever. Revelations 22:1 through 5. So the story is the same. It's just ours is bigger. It's not a physical slavery, it's a spiritual slavery and death. It's not moving into houses that will only last a few years and then you need to remodel or upkeep or paint or all those fun things that some of us are just reveling in right now. It's living in cities with streets paved or gold, where rust never falls, the moth never eats. So here's our tasks. Number one, remember those. Remember the state from which we came. We have to remember that story. Secondly, remind ourselves of God's initial kindness, how he approached us. Romans 8:31 and 32. What then are we to say about these things? If God is for us, who would be against us? He did not even spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. How will he not also with him grant us everything? That verse right there tackles both deprivation and decadence. It's both indigence and affluence. If you remember that, you're well on your way. Philippians 4:19, and my God will supply all your needs according to his riches in the glory in Christ Jesus. Not all your wants, but all your needs. Jesus even tells us, if you then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, well, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So we remember the state from which we came. We remind ourselves of God's kindness, of who he is, of his character. And we should respond with obedience and action. Deuteronomy 6:18, we do what is right and good in the Lord's sight so that you may prosper, so that you may enter and possess the good land the Lord your God swore to your ancestors. Just like he said here, righteousness will be ours if we are careful to follow every one of these commands before the Lord our God as he has commanded us, right? Verse 24, the Lord commanded us to follow all these statutes and to fear the Lord our God for our prosperity. In other words, if we want to be prosperous, we need to follow all these commands. For our preservation, as it is today. Israel, unfortunately, within the next 800 years or so, didn't do this. And they were removed from the land. It's clear. As Block points out, Moses' position is that doing what is good, that's a prerequisite from experiencing that which is good. And Jesus said the same thing in John 14:21. The one who has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father. I will also love him and reveal myself to him. So we remember, we remind ourselves, we respond with obedience, and we rehearse it to our children. We tell them over and over again. We live our devotion to God honestly, consistently, daily, so that it becomes just as natural as breathing. And our kids who see that will understand that that's just the way this house is. That's just the way life works, right? The psalmist said, though I've been poor, though I've been young and yet I'm old, I've never seen God's servant lack bread. Sure, have you gone through tough times? Absolutely. But it's ultimately trust in him that brings the abundance we so desire. What's wrong with America today? We've forgotten God. We're so bent on being individualistic, pull ourselves up from our bootstraps, finding our own way, finding our own voice, finding the real us, that we forget what it means to trust in someone higher than ourselves. May we learn that lesson before it's too late. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you not only bless us, but you also let us know where we will trip and fall if we don't heed those blessings, heed those warnings. You give us a clear vision of how we can go wrong, and you gently here correct us in hopes that we can continue to stay on the right path. Let us love you with that obedient love. Let us love you by continuing in those things that you've told us. Because by being an obedient child, we show respect and honor to the Father who provides for us. We ask this in Jesus.
So what's the takeaway in all this? It seems the danger isn't that God has given us blessings. No, it's that we've forgotten him in the blessing. When Israel was blessed, it was also warned. When you have these full houses, abundant food, and everything you didn't build, be careful, because that's when you stop remembering. That's when pride creeps in, and that's when obedience fades. And if we're honest, that's exactly where we are in our culture today. But God didn't just give a warning, he also gave a remedy. He said, remember where we came from, remind ourselves of what God has done, and respond with obedience. And then rehearse it again and again to the next generation. Because if prosperity can cause us to forget God, then that intentional remembrance, that's what brings us back. I hope this teaching has been meaningful to you, and if you find it so, make sure you share this video with someone who needs it. Also, be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss what's coming up in future podcasts. And I'll see you here next week. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.